So today we're super lucky and excited to introduce Chef Eric Lee. He's the head chef at Acreage in Lafayette, Colorado. He's also been with us at Slow Food Nations for the last few years as our head chef for the Commissary Kitchen, which is a team of incredible people and chefs that bring some of the best food I've had to our festival. And Chef Eric also runs our Zero Waste Dinner, which is our most popular and beloved event. It's the last dinner of the festival in which our chef team uses all of the leftover ingredients from the 3 days of the festival to create a super creative, impromptu, and delicious meal on that Sunday night. So that's always been a really big hit. And we love having Chef Eric on the Slow Food Nations team. He's an awesome guy and a wonderful chef, and we're really lucky to have him and his wife Britt, who's behind the camera with us today, helping out. And I will turn it over to Eric to tell you more about himself and get us going with today's session. If you have questions, you can put them into that Q&A box as we go, and then when we're done making minestrone, I will circle back and we'll ask your questions to Eric at the end in our last 10 or 15 minutes. So as we go ahead and pop your questions into that box and we'll get back to them at the end. So Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you again so much for being here this morning or afternoon.
Thanks for having me, Giselle. Yeah, so my name is Eric Lee, and I've been a chef for 23 years. And it's been tumultuous, but currently probably the hardest time, honestly, to be a chef. We at Acreage have been trying to find ways to really keep our team together and keep our team united during all this. And one of the ways we've done that was after the hardest day of my entire career, which was when I had to let 60 employees go. There was still enough food in the walk-in to run the service. So myself and one of my sous chefs, and we started preparing all of that food to gift to our employees, our team. And that was a time when I really was able to draw upon my experience at Slow Food doing the zero waste dinners and really just try to utilize every ingredient in our walk-in. So we did that. We did that for about a week and a half. I think we stretched it to about 10 or 11 days of food, fed to 60 plus people, plus their, spouses, significant others, friends, family, that kind of thing. And we thought that these meals that were coming from it were so incredible. It's just so made with love and passion and really seemed to have something wonderful to them. So we started offering them up to guests. So that's what we're doing right now is we're giving food to our team still 4 days a week, Thursday through Sunday at Acreage in Lafayette. And then we're also offering the exact same meal that we're gifting to our team available for sale to guests that want to partake and help support us. So that's sort of what my job has morphed into now as a chef, is trying to keep my team together and keeping them fed during this difficult time. I spent a good part of my career working in farm to table type stuff and slow food type of things, and the last three years that I've been a part of Slow Food Nations here in Denver have been some of the best times I've gotten to have as a chef, and that zero waste dinner specifically. Yeah, anyway, enough yammering. So what we're going to make is minestrone, and what I think is so great about minestrone is there's not really like any one specific recipe. I'm sure if you ask an Italian chef, they might argue that because, well, they're Italian and they always know, right? The right way is the way mom did. But what I like about it is because there's no specific recipe, it's really just vegetables and broth and maybe beans or pasta or things like that. It really can be a great vessel for utilizing random ingredients you might have around. Some of those random ingredients, pumpkin that my wife brought in November from Southern Colorado, and has been sitting under this table down here. You can see some more of them since November, and we're like, well, might as well use it, right? Some carrots and a little bit of chard that came from my buddy Linnell at Fresh Guys. They've been offering produce boxes all around the Denver area, so they gather together some local produce, and it's like $20 a box, and there's a lot of cool stuff in there, including reunion bread, which is what we're going to use to make the ribollita, which is a nice way to get a second life on minestrone, which is sort of already a second life on vegetables that might be needing some love. But here's our spread right here. We've got the cut up pumpkin and some of those beautiful Thumbelina carrots and a bit of celery, and there were like 2 tomatoes floating around, and a couple strips of bacon that need to get used, or otherwise, well, we'd probably just eat them with eggs or something. And there's a bit of fennel in our fridge, so we cut that up, and some onion and garlic. And here's the chard, and I like to use the stem too because zero waste. You don't want to throw stuff out, and it really does have wonderful flavor. A little bit of red bell, and there was some potatoes floating around, and some of them didn't look quite as nice, but they'll still be good for this. You just give them a good hearty scrub. And then cannellini beans. If you had flageolet or a Great Northern or something like that, those work. Chickpeas are great as well. If you didn't have beans floating around, you wanted to do pasta works. I would recommend a short noodle for pasta, but again, it can kind of be whatever you've got. We have a bit of tomato paste and some rosemary and a fair bit of parsley, and then some chicken stock. If you have veg stock that works, and mushroom stock could work, beef stock, like really just have fun with it. A bit of oil, and over here I've got my pan, which I already rendered the bacon fat out in, so just leaving the bacon fat in the pan, because again, you don't want to throw the bacon fat out. It tastes great. Might as well use it. So we're gonna get started. So the big difference between an Eastern soup or broth and a Western soup or broth is how you start the base. So with Eastern, you would start by making the broth, and then you would add your components to the broth as it's gently simmering. So you would add, maybe carrots or onion or your daikon or your meat or whatever it might be, and they'd already be either partially cooked or cut small enough that they would all cook at the same speed. But with most Western soups, you usually start by building up your vegetable base. So you might render a bit of meat and then pull the meat. You might throw a bit of herb in the bottom and create like a little sofrito of sorts in the bottom of the pan. And then you just continuously cook all these items, and you finish with the broth, you simmer it for a couple of minutes, and you're done. So for our purposes, trying to make a rapid fire meal, that's a really nice way to get started. Start with something, cook it all quick, and then you can build your other component later. Since we have a few heartier vegetables, we're gonna start with our allium, that's the onion and fennel and the garlic, and give it a really nice sweat. And then we're going to add our heartier vegetables into it. And then we'll probably add a bit of broth, and we'll let it come to a rolling boil. And we'll add our other items like the chard leaves and the tomato, and like the rosemary right at the end. And then the very last thing we're going to add is the bacon and the parsley, because the bacon's already nice and crispy. And we don't really want to kill that flavor or that texture. And the parsley, of course, will die really quick if you put it in too fast. So I like a good bit of herb.
That lives there now.
That lives there now. That's where that stays. Just gonna grab another one. There we go. Okay, so we're looking for this to get really ripping hot. We want like some vapor to come off of that. We'll see it in just a moment. Yeah. So the fun thing to do with all this when it's over is ribollita. Ribollita is, well, every culture really has like a use for day-old bread, right? The Italians thankfully have many, many uses for day-old bread. But one of the really great ones, I think, is ribollita. So you would make your broth, your minestrone, and traditionally, if they were cooking this, they might be cooking it on a hearth, which holds heat for a long period of time, or they might be doing like an AG cooker, which is like, it's kind of like a range, but you get a lot of heat in one area, and it heats the whole thing from like one spot where you would put your logs. And that, again, it's got a big, thick cast iron top, and that would hold heat for a long time as well. So what they would do at the end of the night is they would take a bunch of bread and they'd throw it in with all their minestrone, broth, etc., and just put it in the coldest part of the hearth or the cooker or the cast iron top or whatever, and just let it sit. And as it sits, we got some nice vapor coming off here now. As it sits, it's going to pull, like that bread's really going to soak up all of the liquid, right? And it gets really, really thick. Important thing, you want to make sure that you're seasoning each component as you add it. It's a little salt as you add each component, because that way you know that you've got the right amount. You're seasoning a little bit, and you're also building the flavor. So rather than trying to salt at the end, which is going to end up having to take a lot more because you didn't let it dissolve in and cook with each component, this way you can season the onion until it tastes just like a nicely seasoned salted onion, and it's just no salt itself. And then as you continuously build more components, you'll salt each one of those. And you can kind of guarantee that you're not adding too much of anything. So the ribollita, they would let it sit, and when they come back to it in the morning, it would be pretty thick. And they would turn it out or scoop it out, right, and get another pan, rip it hot with a little fat in the bottom, and then fry the ribollita in the pan with all that fat. Right? And you get this really big crust on both sides, and you get a nice party crust on it. And then maybe an egg, or maybe a bit of pork left over from a couple of nights before, or something like that. And that's your breakfast, and you're good to go. And you start out your day, and something hearty that kind of sticks to your guts. It's a nice way to start. Or maybe it puts you back into the nap. Right now you've got the time, hopefully.
There are some perks.
There's a few perks. Okay, so we're going to cook this until we start to see that sort of famous line, the onions go translucent. I've never actually seen a translucent onion. That's not really a thing. But you want to go until the onions start to release a lot of their liquid. Onions are very juicy. They become kind of like steam in the pot. You'll feel it coming off. Just let them cook out, get really sweet and sugary. And we're getting pretty close. My top burner.
He likes this burner best. I always burn everything on it, but this is Eric's favorite burner on the stove.
High heat for everything, all the time.
Always high heat.
All right, so now we're going to add our hearty vegetables. That's celery, this is really chunky cut carrot, and that's a really kind of needing to be used up pumpkin.
From November.
From November.
My mother-in-law, whom I love very much and may even be on this call, I think she thought I was losing it because I still had squash out.
Fall decor.
My fall decor in the spring.
We're going to let you get off of that a little bit. Let that cook on for a minute.
Giselle, I saw someone say the sound was bad. Can everyone hear us okay? If needed, we could call in and have Eric try to talk through a headphone. Can everyone else hear okay?
Britt, I think sometimes it's okay and sometimes it's a little muffled, and maybe your finger is on that microphone sometimes.
I'm trying to keep it off, but
that sounds great. You sound great right
okay,
now.
Maybe that was it. Okay, good. Just checking.
I have a tendency to talk under my breath.
I can be fat fingered here apparently, but I'm like covering cameras. All right, glad everyone
I
can
get
hear.
it,
Okay,
please.
sorry.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so we're seeing the celery is starting to change color a little. You know, it's getting a really nice, good sear on it, you know, and the carrots, you see, it's kind of funny, but if you really like watch closely, the carrots edges, they'll go from being very sharp to being kind of rounded. And that's when, you know, like the heat starts to penetrate the carrot a little bit. And when you're making a broth like this, you know, it's okay for things to look a little softer, a little creamier. If you're going more Eastern style, which I think could be kind of interesting with a minestrone, to start as a broth and add your components later. And I've done that when I've tried to do like a very spring-centric minestrone. You make a green broth, and then maybe you float some favas and some English peas, and maybe you're rich, so you put ramps and fiddleheads and things like that into it as well. And you get this like vibrant green spring-style minestrone. And you can still call it that because technically minestrone is just a vegetable-based soup, right? So you can kind of do whatever you want and be like, oh, it's minestrone. And I'm sure there's some guy out there that I was thinking about killing. All right, so rosemary is a very hardy herb. And I like to, when I'm cutting rosemary, I like to gather it all together, all the needles facing up in the same direction, and cut it really, really fine in that first turn, right? And then I'll spin it, and I'll pass through it like twice, and that's it. I think people have a tendency to really beat the hell out of their herbs. And if your cutting board's green when you're done, you chop too hard.
For your
Maybe
knife.
your knife needs to be sharper. Maybe you're just like really whacking it down on there. That's not great, right? All that chlorophyll ended up on the board, and now your herbs taste like grass, right? Like cut long. So really, like, go really fine in that first cut. Make sure your knife is nice and sharp, and then a very, very light pass through, and so you're keeping the majority of the flavor in the herb. In this case, rosemary being pretty hardy, I'm going to add a little bit of it now, and we'll just let it kind of open up. We'll let it perfume this very rich and hearty soup that we're making. And if you've got a bigger pot and you want to make a lot of it, awesome. This stuff, it freezes great. It will hold for a long, long time in your fridge, even unfrozen. You have to frost it. Never frosted. Yeah, like a good probably week and a half, 2 weeks on this. So now we're gonna add our potatoes. You see how the celery really changed color. We have a little caramelization on it in some spots, and the carrots start to get a little softer.
You can really smell the rosemary.
Can you guys get that?
You guys smell?
Is the water smell-o-vision working?
I watched it.
A little more salt for the potatoes. Now we're going to add the sliced garlic. I try not to add sliced garlic too soon because it burns very quickly. So I want to add it a little later and let it stay kind of creamy. I will add our chard stems now as well.
What other stems do you like to cook with? Like beet?
Sure, and these beets. We've already just done this. Okay, so we're building a nice broth now. We've got a good base. We're most of the way there. You can see a little caramelization involved in the pan here, and that's all great. Like, that's going to be lifted immediately and deglaze with that stock. If you wanted to deglaze with a little wine, you could. I work for a cidery. Acreage is owned by some ciders. You could deglaze with a little cider if you wanted to. Or you can just go straight into your stock and you'll pick up all that beautiful flavor.
What if you don't have stock or any wine or anything? What could you do?
So you could do water with this because there's a lot of veg, but it's not going to be as rich. A stock really is going to be the way to go. But like I said, if you're on a budget or you're clearing out your fridge, you could do a little water. I would say your flavor is going to change. So up your aromatics. Add some chili to it. Add some bay leaves to it if you have that floating around. A bit of peppercorn or something like that. It's something to like really boost the flavor because water is not super great for a soup. So I'll throw a little pepper in here now.
Bell pepper.
And now it's stock time. Salt. And now it's a good time to add pepper. I don't like adding pepper when you're sauteing because I think pepper burns very easily. And at the bottom of the pan like that, it's going to get contact with the base and it's going to burn. And you're going to be bummed out because you're going to get this sort of acrid flavor. You're not going to know why, and it's probably the pepper. So I use pepper sparingly. And I think sort of gone are the days when chefs would salt and pepper everything. Pepper's a funny thing. It's a flavor in and of itself. It's not like salt. Salt's an enhancer. Salt makes sure that everything else tastes more like itself. But pepper's a flavor. So not everything has to have pepper. That's a common misnomer. I think, victims of the spice trade on this one, where everyone sort of thinks, oh, well, everything has to have salt and pepper. Well, pepper was more accessible than, say, I don't know, star anise. But world could have just as easily gone that direction, right? If star anise had been more accessible, like, oh, did you use salt and star anise, all of that? And that doesn't really make sense. You wouldn't put that on everything. So I think pepper has a place, and it's wonderful, and I love it. I don't have anything against it, but I don't use it everywhere. I do think of it in this. It's really nice, though. So we can see the other real big difference between an Eastern and a Western, right, is now we have all this fat sitting on the top, right? And if you kind of give it a stir, you can see there's the broth underneath, right? But all the fat is floating on the top right now. So it's going to be very rich, it's going to be very hearty because of all that excess fat. If you wanted to go the other direction and you wanted to do this without any fat in your pan, that's totally doable. Start with your broth, add your components, and make sure that you're adding them in a way where they're all going to cook at the right time, the right speed. So you can do that by either cutting your vegetables up a lot smaller, or adding them in stages, right? So your heartier things, again, like carrots, potatoes, squashes, they're going to take longer, right? But a crunchy bit of celery in there is not going to be a bad thing. It'll taste nice. Onions, you probably want them to cook down a little bit. Peppers, nice and crispy, fantastic. So just think about it when you're building your base up like that. All right, so we're going to cook that out for a couple minutes. You can already see it's kind of pulled some of that caramelization off the inside of the pan here. See how a lot of that's gone away there. See that? So we've picked up all that flavor that was in the bottom of the pan. Very rich, very hearty. We don't want to like rolling boil it.
So no more high heat.
So it's time to, like, once the heat comes up, right, now it's time to turn it down a little. Because if you really like rage boil your soup, you're going to get two things. One, you're going to mush out most of your vegetables, and you get more of like a creamy soup, which I guess is all right, but it's not really minestrone. Or two, the other thing that will happen is you get really, really cloudy soup. Which you're sitting at home and you're thinking like, well, I don't care, it probably tastes good, right? But a lot of the cloudiness is like pulling out some of the impurities and stuff from all the various components, and that really means you're pulling out a lot of the flavor from those components too, and you're letting all that evaporate up into the air. You're just like, you're killing a lot of the flavor, right? So like just rage boiling the heck out of it and just being like, I gotta get this done, is actually going to be somewhat detrimental in the long run. You're not going to enjoy the soup as much. If instead you let everything have its time, things take time, right? You got to let something have its period of time to cook. You wouldn't take a leg of lamb and sear it once and be like, great, I'm good to eat, right? Because it needs time. Well, vegetables need time too. They need a minute. You got to let them have that. How you doing, buddy?
All good.
You all good?
Mhm.
So we got a good simmer going. Just gonna taste it, see where we're at. Really what I'm looking for is the potato. As the potato cooks, then I know my squash is done. There we go.
And I'm guaranteeing that we're still a few minutes out on that. Closer than you think, though. It's probably like 5 minutes, and we're gonna be done with this because we cut them nice and small. So a bit more salt, a little more pepper. We're gonna whack in the rest of this rosemary because I like rosemary. Thyme works well. Sage. Yeah, put your savory in your garden. I don't know. Go for it.
What about dried herbs?
Dried herbs are kind of sad, aren't they?
But
You've taken something that was so beautiful and you've just like taken all the love out of it. I don't know. I have a major issue with dried herbs. What do you mean, buddy? You okay?
I just need to get to the talking Tom where there he has the wand and try to get the bad guys.
okay,
Oh, okay. Hey, Charlotte, can you help him out?
thanks, Charlotte.
I want to
But if all you have is dried herbs, don't you use less?
so going to here.
Yeah. I mean, technically, if you're using dried herbs, they're probably going to be pretty pungent. But also, they're not going to be the same flavor. So, take that into consideration, but definitely use less. Like, you're not going to whack half a container of rosemary in if you're using dried rosemary. Really, though, like, you got a lot of time at home right now. If you don't have a lot of fresh herbs, buy some seeds, plant an herb garden. It's fantastic. Nothing will increase your flavors like fresh herbs, and I can't speak highly enough.
Do you want to do some Q&A while it's cooking? Does it need a little bit more time right now? Or
Yeah, it needs a couple minutes.
Okay.
We can do some Q&A. What do we got? Giselle, do we have any questions?
Here I go.
give her a minute now.
Sorry. Chats, questions, videos. I'm on it. First, so great so far. Killing the game here. Question. Can you just quickly run through the ingredient list? This sounds a little muffled, so a couple of folks I think are trying to jot down the ingredients you're putting in.
Yeah.
And then one that I'll attach to that, is there any must-haves so that this qualifies as minestrone?
I think must-haves to make it minestrone vary based upon who you ask. Some people will say, well, you have to have beans, or you have to have beans, tomatoes, carrot, celery, onion, or someone might say, well, also called mirepoix, depending on where you're at in your culinary field. Or someone might say, if there's no pasta in it, it's not minestrone. But if you check it out in maybe the Food Lover's Companion or Wikipedia or something like that, it's not really accurate. It can kind of be whatever you want. Really, it's a veg-based soup. But again, you can put meat in it. We're putting a little bacon in ours because, it's bacon. If you wanted to put something else in, that's the great thing about it, is it can really be kind of what you have around. I like hearty vegetables if you're doing a rich, hearty one like this. But if you're going for a lighter one, then do sort of what I said, where you make a really clean broth and then float some vegetables into it, and then you've got a really light, really clean minestrone. We, in ours, again, we put mirepoix, carrot, celery, onion. We put some garlic, we put peppers. We've got potatoes in there and some random pumpkin that was floating around. We got some red bells. We've got tomato, stock, rosemary. We're going to put some chard into it. We're going to put some chard stems in it. I've got some cheese over here. We're going to put cannellini beans in ours, parsley, all these things. But if you don't have pumpkin and you wanted to have something sort of squash-like, you could use zucchini. If you had a whole bunch of eggplant floating around, dice it up, salt it, let it sit in a colander for a little bit, let a lot of that liquid get purged from the eggplant, sear it real hard. You could maybe oven roast it or something like that, and float it into your broth right near the end. It'd be great. Right? Maybe you've got your grill fired up. Grill off some zucchini or some yellow squash or some patty pans or something. Right? Dice them up, fold them in right at the end. Maybe you've got a plethora of tomato. Right? Maybe you want to do your minestrone as a bit of stock and some tomatoes and some beans and just a little onion. You know, that's still a great minestrone. You could do some really cool stuff with that. Maybe you peel your tomatoes and you set them in oil or something like that, and you float a few over the top. Or maybe you don't want to get super chefy with it and you just want to dice them up and cook them down. It all works. And that's really the beauty of minestrone, is this is an opportunity for you to utilize a lot of the random components that are sitting around your house. Maybe you got half an onion in your fridge because you put a little on a sandwich earlier. Maybe you've got 2 stalks of celery left and you don't know what to do with it, or just the innermost parts. Right? If you got like just the inner ribs of the celery, great. Dice up all the stalk, save all the yellow leaves, rough chop them, and use the yellow leaves for the instead of parsley at the end. What we're gonna do. That's a fantastic flavor. I hope that kind of answered some questions.
Yeah, definitely.
Was it too muffled? Yeah.
Nope, I could hear you great, and I think
Great.
that everyone's with me. So I have a couple more questions for that. One, somebody would like to know if bouillon cubes are okay or totally forbidden. Question.
I think they're better than water. That's
Okay.
for sure. Yeah.
Perfect. And so when you said if you're going to use water instead of broth to up your aromatics, that might be a way to do that if you don't have a lot of aromatics, or
For sure. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on sweet potatoes?
I personally really dislike sweet potatoes. It's like one of the only vegetables. It is the only vegetable that I really dislike.
True confession of a
I
chef.
don't like bananas very much. I don't like sweet potatoes very much. But I like everything else, like literally everything else. So I don't know. If you like sweet potatoes, though, go for it, man. Like,
Your
have fun.
soup, yeah.
I think, the white sweet potatoes might be a better choice for something like this. You don't want this soup to be too sweet or too sugary. It's supposed to be a hearty, kind of like rustic, rich sort of a soup. But again, nothing's really set in stone here. So if you got a bunch of sweet potatoes floating around and you want to sub those in, go for it.
Great. And if somebody wanted to make this vegan, I imagine you just leave out any meat products and use a vegetable broth?
Yeah, this would be a breeze of a soup to make vegan. Like super easy. Maybe you want to go like kind of meaty on it still, so you put like celeriac into it, some hearty mushrooms, that kind of stuff could work great. And because you're putting a lot of beans into it, you can get some protein and still feel like it was a rich, full meal while just using, mushroom stock. Or again, going back to the green minestrone, we're using like kale and spinach and chard and parsley and things like that, and you're like pureeing all that and making a vibrant green broth. Like, cool. It'll be fantastic. It will taste really great.
Great, perfect. And then one more question before I think you might have to get back to that pot. I think in the early part of this session, you had some potatoes soaking in water. And can you tell us why?
Yeah, so I cut them about 40 minutes ago because I was antsy and I was trying to get ahead. And if you just leave them out, they're going to oxidize and go all sort of grayish colored, and it just doesn't look very nice. It doesn't necessarily hurt the flavor, but it doesn't look great. And that gray color will kind of stay even when you cook them. So by cutting them and putting them directly into cold water, it just preserves the life on them. What it does also do is it pulls out some of the starches. So if you're trying to get a thicker soup or stew, you can actually use some of the starches from a freshly cut potato, like that white that's kind of the residue that's left on your board or your knife after you're done cutting. If you put them straight in rather than getting them into water first, it will slightly thicken your soup or stew. So yeah, it's like when you cut an apple and then you come back to it 5 minutes later and it's like kind of gray brown. It's just oxidizing.
Yep. And I see you're using a heavy Dutch oven type pot. Any thoughts or ideas on like what the best vessel for this is if I don't have something like that at home?
Yeah, so we've also got like, one of these, a stainless steel like pasta pot. I like something with a thick bottom because it retains heat really well, but it doesn't need to be, anything as higher end as something like this. What I would recommend is staying away from aluminum. Just in general, I wouldn't buy aluminum pans at your house. But one of the reasons is they are reactive, which means they can change the color and some of the flavor of whatever you're cooking. Especially high acidity items like maybe you're making a tomato sauce, you'll actually get like a tinny sort of metallic flavor from it. It's pretty rough. So I would avoid aluminum, like, well, grocery stores right now, or any of the other horrible things that you have to be mindful of right now. I was going to say the plague, but staying with the times.
Too soon.
All right, so the potatoes are fully cooked. They still have a nice sharp edge on them, which means if you look at one of them, you can see the cut lines. Right? You see that? How like it's still got a really good point. Yeah?
They're not mushy.
They're not mushy at all. They haven't gone all like soggy, but they are fully cooked. They're delicious. Now is the perfect time to add the rest of our components. So we're going to add the tomato. And then, of course, because we added something, we're going to add a little salt. And then we're going to add our beans. And we can add our bacon now, too.
And those were 10 beans that were rinsed, right?
Yeah, it was a can of beans. Exactly. If you've got fresh beans and you want to, or like dried beans or whatever, and you want to cook them, some people will say that it's nice to save a little of the liquid and to cook like with the liquid as your liquid component in this. I don't generally abide by that. I don't like using the bean liquid very much, but again, staying with the times, that is actually a pretty common thing now, is to use the bean liquid for other things. You know, you hear about like aquafaba, that's just bean cooking water, which has got a lot of like starches and stuff in it. And then they puree that and they make the vegan egg white stuff for your cocktails now, which is
Interesting.
it's interesting. It's all right. All right, so we're gonna turn the heat up a little bit. We're just gonna get a good hard simmer because we're adding cold components. And as soon as we see a simmer, we're gonna add our chard. We're gonna kill the heat. We're gonna throw in our parsley, quick zest of some lemon, maybe a squeeze. I like adding acidity to pretty much everything I cook with. Salt and acidity all the time. And then some of the other ones come along, you know, depending on how you want to use them. So maybe a little chili for heat. You know, maybe you're using something kind of bitter, you know, it can be kind of nice sometimes. A little radicchio or something like that could be really great in this. You know, maybe you want that like umami-like flavor and you're floating a little miso into it. It could work. Probably blasphemous, and I'm sure
People are logging off right now.
Yeah,
they're
like,
all logging out.
But you could do it. You could totally do it. And you get away with it as long as no one saw.
If we didn't have lemon, couldn't we use like vinegar?
Yeah. Lemon, citrus in general, is great if you're going to eat it right then. But the flavor of citrus, like cooked citrus, I think it's a bit rough. I don't like how it pulls together, like cooked citrus flavors generally. So if you were making this and you were planning on batch cooking and you were going to hold some for later, definitely use vinegar. If you're planning on making this right now and everyone's going to eat it and you're excited about that, a little lemon juice right before you eat, fantastic. And we're almost there. The more you agitate, obviously the slower it will heat, but I'm also trying to make sure nothing burns to the bottom. That would be unfortunate. So you can see how rich and thick this is, right? Technically, it's nearly a potage. Potage, there you go, is when you can put a spoon in your cooking vessel and it will stand straight up just by virtue of all the vegetable that's in there. So we've basically made a minestrone potage. So we nailed it. If you want to make it brothier, by all means, make it a little brothier. But know that if you're making ribollita later, you're going to have to add that much more bread to make it absorb all of the liquid. So if you're planning on making ribollita with it, a little less broth, probably a good choice. All right, we're seeing a simmer, which means our flavors are starting to come together. We're seeing some of the skin is starting to peel off of this piece of tomato here. So we know we're about as cooked as we really want to be. And everything's gonna be nice and hot. I'm gonna add our chard now. And as I said before, I like a really green, well, actually, I like pretty much everything to be really green all the time. But it doesn't have to be. You don't have to use a leaf if you don't have any around. You can use kale, you know, like lacinato, sometimes called Cavolo Nero, or dinosaur kale. Great. You get some cabbage. Sure, throw some cabbage into it. As I was saying earlier, if you get like a chicory, like radicchio, or I don't know, endive or something like that floating around in your fridge, go for it. It'll work.
I've seen someone ask a couple times about opa squash. How do you feel about that?
I don't know that I'm familiar with opa squash.
If it's like a winter squash, then probably just go for it. And summer squash.
I would cook it ahead of time if it's a summer squash. Cook it separately, and like we're floating in our chard right now, I would float the summer squash at the end. The summer squash, it's time to kill it. Summer squash can go kind of soggy, and that's not great. But if you want to use it, you absolutely should. Just cook it separately, either on the grill or sear it hard in a pan, or roast it in the oven or something like that. But if you're going to roast it in the oven, turn your heat way up, like almost a oven cleaning temperature.
And
like
hopefully your oven is clean if you're going that high.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and make sure you get your fire extinguisher handy. Turn it way up because you want to get a really hard sear, and you don't want it to purge a whole bunch of its liquid. Otherwise, it just becomes really soggy. If you put it in at like 350 or 400 or something, it's just going to be a soggy mess. You want it instead to oven sear, which basically means you have so much dry heat that it sears the outside of it before it has a chance for it to really purge all the liquid that's still like held in the squash. Maybe trim the seed out too.
And another person's curious about using frozen spinach in this. Would you recommend that? Maybe defrost it?
If it's like the chopped up frozen spinach, that stuff's probably only really good for like cream spinach. But if it's like frozen spinach leads and it's a fairly decent quality one, yeah, you could probably use that. I would defrost it and probably wring it out. You know, like put it in a kitchen towel and like really squeeze it and wring it out. Try and get all that excess liquid and water weight out of it, because when you freeze a leaf, especially like spinach, which, you know, the joke with spinach is you can start with a cup or you can start with a pound. You're going to end up with a half cup. When you're using it something as watery as spinach, you don't want all that like frozen water purge to just end up in your soup and change the flavor. Right? You're going to make your soup taste kind of watery. So yeah, that'd be a good way to get some of the flavor out first, or some of the water weight out first. All right, so I'm going to taste it one last time. And just make sure our flavors are where we want them. That's pretty good. It doesn't even need any more salt. And now we're going to hit just a quick zest of lemon into it. If you don't have one of these, I definitely recommend getting one, a microplane. They're fantastic. Whenever I zest directly over whatever I'm about to put the zest into. And the reason for that is when you zest, you actually see like this mist or this spray come off of it, and you can smell it right now. That's the essential oils from the lemon zest, and that's going out into the air. You want to direct where that goes. That's good flavor. Right? So zest that directly over your soup or over your whipped cream or whatever it is you're making.
Good timing.
He agrees. And you'll get to keep all that beautiful essential oil. So I always zest that way. All right, so we got this. Folded that in a little. And now we're going to hit it with a big whack of parsley.
We have our young camera worker here, Charlotte, on the phone for a moment. She seems to have a steadier hand than me.
Atta girl.
Make me laugh.
There we go. So we see how nice and green and pretty it all went. It definitely becomes more appetizing. And then if we're finishing, you know, you're putting it into a bowl, a little cheese right on the top, kind of nice. I've got a pecorino right here. You could use a Parmesan or a Grana Padano or something like that. What I would definitely not ever use is Asiago. Asiago is trash cheese.
Hey,
It is.
we just lost
Asiago is
50
like-
more followers there.
Asiago is like plasticky. You know, it just never really has that flavor. But pecorino, if you've got like a cow's milk issue, fantastic. It's a sheep's milk version of a Parmigiano Reggiano. So it can be really great, especially for our household. Works out real good. Wife's grinning at me sort of sheepishly behind the camera.
Let's all the sheep come.
See what I did there? Okay, so that's that. I'm gonna grab a ladle from under the camera here.
Sorry.
And we're gonna ladle up a bowl, and then I'm gonna show you adding the bread to it.
I'm gonna not throw you under the bus here, but you didn't use your tomato paste that you had pulled out. Is
So-
that because we had tomatoes?
So you are gonna throw me under the
A little
bus
bit.
here.
Well, I think the people want to know.
The people want to know. Yeah, honestly, it's because we had the fresh tomatoes, and I felt like I didn't want it to be super tomato heavy. So when I was looking at it, I made a decision to not add the tomato paste. But if you were going to add the tomato paste, you would have done it when you were sweating out all the vegetables, probably the same time as you're adding the rosemary. That way it can create more of that fond in the bottom of the pan, and you can get like a sweeter flavor from that. Yeah. So that's that. Good whack of cheese over the top. Our trusty microplane. Oh yeah.
I think the young boy said he was hungry.
We will serve it to the boy. We'll be stoked.
Or he'll
Gave you a
complain and
face,
ask
he's
if
like,
it's spicy. We'll see. You never know. Even children of chefs complain about the food sometimes.
We are, thanks. So if I was going to add bread, I would literally just dice this up, and probably I'd dice it a little bit chunky, a little large. So that when you're, well, first it will soak up more. It will create more structure and body, right, if it's nice big chunks like this. But also, when you're going to cook it later, you'll get these sort of stacks that have like some bread and some beans and some of the pumpkin and potato and all that stuff built in. And you get this really cool, like, if you want to get real fancy with it, cook it in a frying pan with a ring mold, which I think we've got. There we go. One of these. You can scoop it out, pack it into the ring mold in that, cook it like that in the pan, right? And then when you take the ring mold off after you flipped it, right, you get this white outside where you can see all the vegetables stacked, and you get really dark gold on the top and the bottom, and it's pretty. It looks cool for the family. And during this sort of time, sometimes it's nice to have something that looks pretty when you're about to eat too. It can be good to have that kind of appeal, I think. Yeah, so that's it. I don't know if I ran over how we're doing on time.
Well, would there be a bad bread for this? Someone was wondering what kind of bread that is, and if there's a like, is there a preference on what bread to use?
Bread you shouldn't use?
Yeah.
I would stay away from rye, because rye's got, or like a pumpernickel or something like that, because they've got very strong, hearty flavors already. Really try to match the bread to what you're cooking with, but definitely you want to look for something crusty. You kind of still hear that, right? It's got this like little cracking sound going on, which is really nice. Something still crusty, something somewhat rustic. You don't want to put like Wonder Bread or
Right.
wheat or something like that into it, because if you did that, really that stuff's just gonna sog out so badly. It's gonna turn to mush.
So probably something whole grain.
You want something a little chunkier, you know, something that will hold some shape and body, even if it is soaked. If you don't have something like this floating around, you don't have like a rustic bread, then don't worry about it. This is still a great soup, and it's something that you can use, as breakfast anyway, or freeze for later, or bring to your neighbors if they're not feeling well. It doesn't have to mean like, oh, well, I don't have a rustic bread, so I can't make this soup. This is a byproduct of the soup. This is a great way to get a second life on it, especially if you've got some old husk of bread sitting around. So,
There's lots of requests for pictures tomorrow, so I'm going to hold him to that, you guys, and have him make this for us for breakfast in the morning so I can take some pics. It's all for them, Eric. They need to see the finished product.
Right.
So we'll definitely make sure that we get a really good, it's for the people. They need to see it, and we will let you know how it tastes tomorrow.
for the people,
For,
I'll do it.
for everyone.
Yeah, for everyone else.
Not me. I'll do it for them.
Right.
Can we also get a picture of Britt's face after she eats it? Is that part of I mean, I know it's for us, but I'll take it. Your timing is perfect and you are delightful. This is wonderful. Eric, I know you can't see the chats, but there's a lot of gratitude and love for you in there, and Britt, of course. Keeping
Sorry
you
for
on
the
your
jelly
toes.
camera, everyone. Doing my best.
So good.
Because you laugh.
That's it. I'm going to send a couple more questions your way, but we've done pretty good at answering them along the way, I think, between our little team here. Can we use canned diced tomato for this recipe, or any sort of canned tomato?
Yeah, you definitely could. I would, again, drain the excess liquid. Don't necessarily throw the liquid out, though, with canned tomatoes. Hang on to that, and maybe instead of tomato paste, when you're cooking out your vegetables earlier on, before you add any liquid, add the tomato liquid, cook that down a little bit, and you'll get some of that flavor. Because again, zero waste. We're not trying to throw anything out here. We're trying to use up what we have, and that is great flavor. It's gonna again make your soup pretty watery. If you've got whole tinned tomatoes, just smash them a little bit in your hand before you throw them in, and they'll get this really kind of cool sort of chunkiness and striation to the soup. Here you go. The boy's trying it.
Got a customer.
What do you think?
Oh,
yeah,
thumbs up.
Attaboy. So tinned tomatoes, they'll work great. No problem at all. I maybe would stay away from the fire roasted ones, but only because they kind of have like a kerosene flavor to them. They're not like a quality fire roasted usually. I think they don't really add much as far as like quality to your dish. But if you're buying tinned tomatoes, I think Muir Glen is a great one. They seem to have some pretty good stuff. Yeah, I would use them for sure.
What kind of vinegar do you like?
For something like this, either a red wine vinegar or a sherry vinegar would both work really well. If you were making the green minestrone, maybe a high-end champagne or cider vinegar could work really well. If you were going kind of more Asian feeling on this and you were doing miso into it and something like that, maybe a little rice wine vinegar is a nice way to go. What I would stay away from is distilled white vinegar. Distilled white vinegar is meant for cleaning. It is not meant for human consumption. That is a common fallacy. That stuff's terrible.
Or good for dyeing your Easter eggs if you have extra eggs to dye right now. There's the other common use for it. Volcanoes.
I made some floor cleaner with some the other day.
It's good stuff for that.
I want to ask you, in the rare case that there is any leftovers, what we should do with our leftovers, or if there's maybe two of us in a house and I like to make batches, how best to keep it.
And cool it.
Yeah, so you want to cool it first, and if you got a really big batch, put it in something kind of shallow to create as much surface area as possible, so it will cool as quickly as possible. You want to get it down to around room temperature within the first hour, right? And then you can put it in the fridge and cool it the rest of the way. And then I would either put it into Ziploc bags and seal the bags and stack them so you're like flat packing them. That way they defrost really quickly. Or you can put them into quart containers like delis. We have a fair few in my household. This kind of thing. If you buy a lot of maybe Asian food, sometimes the curries will come in that. So anything like that can work really well too. And that you can label when you made it and what it is when you put it in the fridge. And that way, if you're looking at it 10 months from now, you go, oh yeah, I've kind of let that go too far. But in the freezer, generally things have about a 6-month shelf life.
Excellent. All right. With our last few minutes, I want to know if you have any other tips for maybe just like increased cooking at home. Folks are cooking at home, and or how to support restaurants. Like I think that moves us into a little bit of a different conversation, but I think that everyone would be happy to hear how we can support a restaurant like Acreage, go get the takeout, that sort of thing. And then when we are cooking at home, how to set ourselves up for that. I think day after day, people who aren't necessarily accustomed to cooking every day, what's the best way to set myself up for doing that? And also, how can I look out for the restaurants that I love?
Yeah, so I think cooking at home, I think it's good to meal plan. You don't necessarily need to plan every single meal. You don't have to be like, well, I'm having this for breakfast and that for lunch and this for dinner. But planning the larger meals, planning your dinners and maybe your breakfasts can be a nice way to go. It also ensures that when you're going to the shop, or if you're doing a click list or you're buying a produce box, something like that, you have a plan for all the things that you're buying. A fair few restaurants in the area right now are setting up like little provisions shops, or doing some boxes or farmers market type stalls, things like that are happening a fair bit. So finding ways to contribute there can be really helpful. And again, meal planning ahead means that when you get there, you're not looking at this slew of things and not really knowing what it is you're going to make. You're going into a plan and an idea. It also means that when you're making something like minestrone one day, you know that the next morning you're going to have ricotta and eggs for breakfast. So you want to make sure you have some eggs, you want to make sure you have some crusty bread, so you can make that kind of thing. If you're, making a pork roast and mashed potatoes, and maybe the next day you're doing my favorite, bubble and squeak. You're taking all the pork, you're chopping it all up, and you're folding it into your mashed potatoes with some random vegetables. And the next morning again, you're taking your little ring mold or just a scoop, and you're frying that in the pan, putting an egg on it. You're making sure that you have uses for all the different things, and you're not going to like throw your dinner away because you got your 2 portions out of it and that's all you needed. Yeah. And then leftover night is always a good thing to plan for. Every 4 or 5 days, maybe you're doing leftover night, clearing out some of the stuff in your fridge, and planning your meals for the following couple of days. One of the great things about planning your meals is, maybe you've got a cookbook floating around that you haven't used in a while, or you haven't really even cracked the spine on. Now's a good time. Have a look through there and decide you're going to make one meal out of it. Maybe it's 1 or 2 a week, and it's not too much to bite off. You've got the time to do it. Prep ahead. If you're cutting some onions today at lunch, and you know that you're going to need them for dinner, cut a couple extras and use them for dinner. Before you get started with all of your cooking, set some things out. Know that you have all of your components ready. Know that you're not missing anything. Prep as much of it as you can before you start cooking, so you're not scrambling and burning your onions because you haven't cut your carrots or you haven't found your stock. And make sure you know what you're using and when you're going to use it. As far as ways to support restaurants right now, it's tough. It's going to vary from restaurant to restaurant. Ways to support Acreage right now would be signing up, for our meals that we're doing, because the restaurant's not making a dime. We're just trying to use the money to pay for the meals that we're gifting out to staff, so that hopefully we can be zero-sum gain. The plan here really is to stop the hemorrhaging, and I think every restaurant is going through that right now. Every restaurant's trying to stop the hemorrhaging. They're trying to make sure that they can just get through to the end of this, so that they can reopen the doors and be there for you and continue serving the way they've gotten to do in the past. You're going to see some changes. I think a lot of restaurants, when they do reopen, if they get to reopen, they're not going to be what they were before. They're going to be different. There's going to be sort of a chaos on the food scene at the beginning. We're tossing around the idea of doing something more like ad hoc used to do or still does once this is all over, which is 1 meal per night. You come in, that's what you're getting. That's what we have available. And one of the benefits to that would be, maybe day 1 when we reopen, we can't spend $25,000 on inventory. We don't have that. I think you're going to see a lot of changes like that. But ordering to go, buying gift cards, there's only so much you can do with gift cards, but it helps. And I know there's a lot of people who are doing gift card deals right now. Maybe frequenting your local brewery or cidery in our case for your beer and wine and cider needs is a little better than going to the liquor stores right now. One, because some liquor stores are kind of crowded, and two, because these are small producers and they can't sell like they used to, and they need the help. So, yeah.
All right, I'm going to steal a show for a second about meal prepping a little bit. If you are currently food insecure and trying to make dinner for your family and are receiving food boxes, don't be intimidated by the fact that you were trying to make a recipe and now you're missing 4 of the things. See if you can find a way to build off of what you got in your food box, to find a way to feel inspired with what you got. I like to go to food blogs or just Google and type in the main ingredient. Maybe it's a pork loin, type in pork loin, and then go from there and see if you can find a recipe where you have 4 of the 5 ingredients, and then just give it a try anyway. So if you're currently food insecure and working off of donation-based items, do not lose faith. You can still make a dinner. You might just have to get a little creative, and also maybe your neighbor's feeling that way. My neighbor needed some soy sauce the other night for her fried rice, and I put it in a container and left it on her sidewalk. You know, this is a time to build a beautiful dinner and build your community as well. So keep cooking, everybody.
Excellent. Thank you both for that. That's really great. Really wonderful insight, and we appreciate you. I'm gonna let everyone go in just 1 minute, since we're just a few minutes past the hour. First and foremost, I want to extend our utmost gratitude to Eric and Britt for being with us today for this hour. This has been wonderful. It's really nice to hear from you about the restaurant. It's really nice to hear from you about tips for cooking at home. And now I really want to have some minestrone. There she is. So thank you two so much for being here, you 4, for letting us into your home. Hi, darling. And for sharing your time with us this morning. We appreciate you. Thanks for your resilience and who you are and what you do, especially at such a challenging time. Thanks to everyone who joined us today. We're really happy to be able to bring everyone together in this creative, experimental way for whatever it's worth. Hopefully your Monday night dinner is going to be extra good. And we have lots of Slow Food Live sessions this week. We have a mental health session tomorrow, which I'm really looking forward to, and dumplings on Wednesday, and then we keep going from there. So join us again. Thank you so much to this wonderful, wonderful family for being here today. We are so grateful for your time, and happy cooking, everyone. Take care. We will follow up. We'll send an ingredient list and a recipe, and a picture of your breakfast tomorrow.
Yeah. We'll definitely get that.
We'll get it done.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much.
Good. Thank
Thank
you.
you.